Okay, let's get started. Welcome to Karmada community meeting. Today is June 25th, 2024. So today, Mihash will share the proposal about accurate estimator improvements for CRD scheduling. So, Mihash, feel free to get started.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll share my screen just so it's easier to follow along.
Mhm.
Let's see here. Not sure who's been able to take a look at this just yet. Um, can you see my screen? Yes? No?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
see the screen. Yeah.
Okay, nice. So yeah, for today, I'm going to be going over this proposal. Really interested in any feedback any of y'all might have. And if you have any questions while I'm going through this, please feel free to stop me. I can clarify anything, or we can just start a discussion from there. Um, the general premise, I think we went over in the previous meeting, but I think it's better to first start off with the background for our use case. So obviously, we're going to be using Karmada in order to schedule Flink deployments. I think the thing that's unique with Flink deployments is that we're treating each individual Flink deployment spec as a single replica. And the way that that works is essentially we'll apply the spec to Karmada, and once Karmada finds a suitable cluster within one of the tenant's namespaces to schedule the Flink deployment in, um, the Flink operator will take over from there, right? And so operator will be in charge of scheduling all the components that are necessary for the Flink deployment to run. And in the Flink deployment, you can kind of divide it into two components. One is the job manager, and the second is the task manager, both of which can have multiple replicas and have different resource requirements. And so this brings us back to, I guess, the problem that currently exists, which we're relying on the accurate estimator with the resource plugin enabled, just so we have an insight into the amount of resources that are currently available in each namespace that we're trying to schedule to. But the problem is that currently Karmada doesn't have a way to define subcomponents for an individual replica that's trying to get scheduled. And so to get around this, what we've been doing is we have a custom interpreter or resource interpreter customization for Flink deployments, which sets the replica requirements equal to the total memory and CPU requirements for all job manager and all task manager pods. But the problem there is that Karmada will just treat this like a singular super replica. And so even though the resource quota plugin will correctly calculate how many max replicas could fit into that namespace, what ends up happening is that we shuffle through all the nodes that are potentially able to be scheduled on, and we filter all of them out because all of the combined resource requirements for the super replica can't fit into any of the remaining nodes. This was to account for the resource fragmentation issue. But in our case, like the super replica is comprised of many different pods. So what we're trying to do is essentially improve the accurate scheduler for cases in which you're trying to schedule a complex CRD, and be able to correctly calculate the max replicas during the scheduling step. So that was a lot of information. Is the background and the problem clear? Okay. So motivation, I think we've gone over. But in terms of the goals, what we wanted to do is provide a way for other users who might also be interested in scheduling CRDs to declaratively define resource requirements for individual components that comprise a single replica of a CRD. And by doing so, I think we would allow more accurate scheduling estimates for CRDs. especially ones that have multiple pod templates or just have multiple components within a single pod template, which is how Flink deployments work. So from the design point of view, what we sort of decided on is to essentially augment the existing replica requirements struct. And so the proposal here is to add in an optional components field to the replica requirements, which would represent or at least tell Karmada, hey, this replica is actually comprised of a multiple of different components that all need to be or will all ultimately be scheduled on the cluster. Um, and then each component will have a name and their own resource request that has to be defined. With the pod count, that's something that I'm not sure whether is going to be required or not. It depends on the granularity on which we want to check whether things can get scheduled on each node. And that comes down to the implementation details of the change to the accurate estimator. So given this augmentation to the replica requirements, what we would want to do is alter the way that the accurate estimator runs its estimation. So if we notice that there are components that are defined for the specific spec that's attempting to be scheduled, then what we would do is we would run the max replica calculation for each plugin as it currently does get run. Um, but the logic would change if components are set when we're actually determining whether this replica can actually get scheduled on all nodes. And so this starts to turn into sort of a bin packing problem because if you have a bunch of components or a bunch of pods and you're trying to figure out how you can fit them onto available nodes, um, we have a couple options there. The first one, which I think is not really recommended, nor do I think I really want to go through with that, is to essentially calculate the precise amount of ways you can pack all the components into the existing nodes. And this would just be too computationally expensive, I think, especially for a scheduling step. And at the end of the day, I think we don't need to be that precise. We do already have the max replica calculation that the plugins have run. And all we care about is that Karmada should verify that all the individual components will fit on the namespace that it's supposed to get scheduled on. And so I think what we could do is essentially just take the max replica calculation that's taken from the plugins and simply confirm that all components individually could get scheduled onto one combination of nodes. And so that would not require us to have to loop through all possible sequences. And we would just essentially return the max replica count if we determine that all components can get scheduled.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think that's essentially those are the two changes. We would be augmenting the replica requirements API, and then making changes to the accurate estimator. Um, any questions?
So, any questions about the proposal uh, regarding to the background and anything, any question? Yeah, actually, I went through the proposal today, and I can understand that for the API part, I can understand that you proposed a minimal change to the resource binding, and the advantage would be seems we don't need to change the resource interpreter interface, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good. But I think I'm not sure if Well, since you introduced the components concept into the resource binding, and there is a pod count inside.
Mm.
Um, so I think we need to explain what's the relationship between the pod counts and the replicas outside the
Mm.
uh, the replica requirements. You know, there is a
Right.
field named replicas in the uh, resource binding.
Hmm.
So I think there will be misleading here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I see that there is sort of I can see how it could get confusing, especially because in the cases in which you just have a single pod template, that's kind of how it works already in Karmada. You simply set the replica number to be equal to the amount of pods that
Yeah.
are specified for the resource. Um, what we could do is remove the pod count and simply just create an estimate for the resource request per component. Um, Even then, though, I mean, would that go against kind of the paradigm that you've created for kind of the concept of replicas, or would that be sufficient?
Mhm. I'm sorry.
I guess what I'm asking is if we had removed the pod count and just kept the resource request for individual
Yeah.
components, would that
Mhm.
be more acceptable, even if it provides more of an estimation as to whether or not they could get scheduled on each
Mhm.
namespace?
I I got you. Uh, I'm not sure because I what I'm thinking probably remove the outside replicas and the replicas will be deprecated by the components. You know,
Mm.
um, so so for the legacy for the workload type which only has one pod template like deployments, um, when we get the replica number and resource requirement, we just set one components in the components, and for workloads like Flink deployment, so we can set two components, and maybe there are uh, maybe other workload type like Volcano job in another Syncept project. Volcano job, it may contains multiple components. So um, so I think the idea of the component is great. So I think the component could be uh, just put. I'm not sure if the component can be put in the just in the specification, and the uh, the resource requirement and replicas number will be part of the component. Yeah, I mean one component may contains replica number, node resource requirements, and namespace, and so on. All things inside the components.
So are you saying that components will eventually replace the concept of replicas, or you're saying, I guess I didn't entirely follow.
I can select the. I I can try to make a sample of the YAML. Try. Hold on. Let me share my screen. Yeah, I mean here in this proposal you put the component into the replica requirements. What I'm thinking is if it's possible to put the replica requirements into components. So that we can pass how many components inside in a workload. Um, so
Okay.
for the take the deployment as an example, the interpreter will tell Karmada there is only one component inside. So the length of the components will be just one. And for Flink deployments, the results interpreter will tell Karmada there are two components and returns each components with the results requirement, the replica number, and a priority, and so on.
Okay, I understand. I think the one complication with that approach is, in our case, the replica number will always be one because all we're interested in Karmada doing is scheduling the CRD. Um, Whereas from a scheduling point of view, like for the estimation, we want to have a window into which components comprise the CRD, right? So in that case, like we might have a job manager that has one replica and then task managers that have three replicas. So
Mm-hmm.
in total, like the way that we want Karmada to interpret that is that there's just single replica of the CRD that's getting scheduled, but there are individually four pods that will be scheduled by the operator once the CRD is scheduled. So I understand what you're getting at, but I think that would end up complicating our use case as well. Unless there's some way to essentially tell Karmada that, okay, this is a CRD. I'm only interested in scheduling the spec. But it's good to know that it has these components.
Yeah. So for now, I'm not sure that's the uh, right direction. So just the idea in my mind. Maybe
Mm.
I would to uh, write the YAML and to see if it looks better. Um, because for the uh, because we are when we are design the API, what I'm thinking mostly is if the API is clear enough to present the if the API is clear enough to hold the information, and if the information is well organized and can be consumed by the scheduler. Um, yeah, I think I can try to read a sample, and then leave my comments onto the PR.
Okay. I think,
Mm.
and even I guess for now, while we're thinking about how the API can be changed, an even simpler workaround for us would essentially be a
Mm.
way to designate to Karmada that Karmada is only scheduling the CRD. I don't know if that would be through the use of a property or something that's set on the resource binding, but um, what that would do is we could essentially just fetch the max replica count that's been returned by the plugins and then skip the sort of node estimation logic that's been placed there for pod scheduling. Um, because at the moment, like what's happening is that it just returns zero for us for the max replica estimation. Um,
Mm.
and we're interested in just getting back the max replica estimate that's been generated by the resource quota plugin. So like even outside of a potential API change, what would make it simpler is if like if you click on the estimation link that I think I placed in the doc, um, just, yeah, if you go to that file on line 59,
File,
oh yeah, so if you scroll down, there was a link to the estimator.go,
yeah,
right? So if you
here.
click, yes, exactly. So if you click on the link to take you to the implementation details, what would help us is right now what we're interested in is just the replicas that get generated on line 78. Um, and at the moment, what it ends up doing is we process nodes to see that the replicas can get fully scheduled on a node. I think what a quick workaround for us would be is if there's a way to tell Karmada that it's only interested in scheduling a CRD. And so it shouldn't have to process all the nodes. It should just return the replica count.
Mhm. But what's the meaning of the returned replicas? Because there are maybe there are two maybe there are two components inside. So
Mhm.
what's the meaning of the replicas? Does the replica means how many groups you can the class can hold the
Yeah, so for us, the replica is essentially, yeah, how many groups of the entire Flink application can fit into the namespace,
hmm,
which
that's interesting. Yeah. Mm,
just because in our
I
case,
think
there's no way to currently deploy Flink applications, like have the deployments be on separate um, member clusters. It's just a single deployment that gets generated. And the job manager
mhm,
itself is spinning up the task manager pods.
mhm.
So there's no way to really separate the two. It's a single deployment, but the job manager spins up task managers. So for us, like the way that we treat replica, it's just like the CRD that's been applied.
Mm, I actually I have another idea about the estimator interface.
Mm.
Um, what I'm thinking if we can introduce another interface and that interface don't tell us how many replicas specific class can hold, but it tells if if the cluster can hold the group of replicas, uh,
Mm.
that's something like the Gantt scheduling. It just tells yes or no if a cluster can hold the a group of components, and I doesn't care how many group, because that might be useless, since for the workloads with multiple components, um, there is a common use case that the component cannot be spread across clusters. They just want to know if a cluster can hold the whole components.
Mhm.
That's um, that use case usually is the gun scheduling, you know.
Uh, I suppose it's gang scheduling, but like the difference is that we're not
Mm-hmm.
scheduling multiple deployments in our case. Like it's simply one deployment that gets scheduled, which is just the job manager. And the
Mm-hmm.
job manager has a spec related to how many task managers that it's going to bring up. So once it starts processing data, the task managers will come up based off of the data requirements um, it's processing. So it's sort of on demand scheduling. Um, but we're basing the estimation off of the resources that we've set in the spec. So like we have um, essentially CPU and memory requirements set for both the task manager and the job manager. So for us, like ideally, the way that we would want to do it, because in your case, if we have like another estimator framework that's just checking whether a group of replicas or pods can be scheduled on a single cluster, um,
Mm-hmm.
like what we would prefer is that you actually get back a number like the max replicas, because that way you can prevent one cluster from just getting um all of the node all of the pods scheduled on it, right? Because you're just going to return yes or no, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
estimation is a combination of every single estimator. So with like cluster locality or cluster affinity, it's just going to start scheduling them to the same cluster, right? And that might create an imbalance between um, how many pods are scheduled on one cluster, and then the other two clusters aren't being used at all, right?
Mm-hmm. Uh, do you mean there is a possibility that the job manager and the task manager could be located in different cluster
Um,
in, in
So no, that'll never be the case. Because once the CRD for the Flink deployment is scheduled on a cluster, all of the
Mm-hmm.
components of that CRD will be scheduled on the same cluster.
Yeah.
Also, sorry, I have to run to another meeting. But thank you for all the comments. I think we could probably just continue having the discussion on the PR in that case.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. At the meantime, I will share the proposal in another community meeting. We will get feedback from the other developers
okay.
from mostly from China, and they hope they can share their ideas.
Sounds good. Yeah, if you have any recommendations, or if anyone else has recommendations, let me know.
Okay. 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 Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye, Mihas. So I'm gonna close the meeting, and so thank you for everyone to join this meeting, and see you next time.